He hasn't spoken a word.
Hello, creeps. It's your old pal, the Crypt Keeper. And you are now tuned in to my good fiends at Talks from the Crypt, the most gruesome podcast in the world.
Sweet, man. Well, Gil, thank you for joining me in Las Vegas today, my friend.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for bringing me back. This is fun.
Oh, of course. Well, let's start it out with a cheers, why don't we? Cheers, my friend.
There you go.
You're sipping on some, what is that called again?
This is Josh Sellers Cabernet.
Josh Sellers Cabernet. I'm sipping on Truly like a basic bitch. You've been to Vegas plenty of times before, right?
I've been here several times.
Do you like it?
I like to come. I like to go.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could take a steady diet of it. I just did a podcast recently where they asked me about other jobs that I had opportunities to go to, and one of them was Vice. And that's the reason I wouldn't want to come to Las Vegas. You know, they offered me the job at Vice, and I said I didn't want to work.
Pull that mic just right.
I didn't want to work Vice at all, and they said, why not? And I said, because Vice entails a lot of drinking. I said, I want to maintain control of my drinking. I said, number two, I'm not a big-time gambler. I said, and they follow gambling a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that much about it. I mean, everything from dice to cards to horses, you know, any kind of betting. I said, and the last thing they do is that they chase prostitutes. You know, it's something that I don't want to get in trouble in. So I just stood away.
Yeah, you got to
and when you come to what they refer to it, everybody else refers to it as Sin City.
Yeah.
There's drinking, there's gambling, and there's prostitutes.
Yeah. Have you? That reminds me of that Norm Macdonald joke where he's like, people say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, which really means if you fuck a hooker, no one will tell your wife.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, it's got to be so different here than it is in LA, right? Because, you know, we're just a barren desert with one street that has all of the good food. I feel like in LA, you could throw a dart at the board and you're landing on some of the best food you've ever had.
Well, it's true. You do have everything here, but everything here costs money too. You don't. I can't imagine a life where I'd be going out to dinner every night at a nice restaurant, someplace to eat that's even family stuff. You know, I like home cooking, and here at home, within an hour from my house, I can be at the beach, I could be at Disneyland, or I could be up in the snow. And here, within an hour, I could be in the desert, or the desert.
Right.
You know, so everything that goes on centrally down here in Las Vegas, and if there's that much gambling, dope, prostitution, everything else that goes with Sin City, then that means there's got to be crime.
Yeah.
And so you got to be cautious.
Right. Now, have you seen like a new level of fame since the Netflix doc dropped?
Oh, most assuredly.
So did you get noticed out in public?
Yes. I mean, I was at a Chicago White Sox game, and I'd gone there as a speaker, not to the White Sox game, but I was in Chicago speaking, and at the time I was working he was calling me his co-host with George Lopez, an actor, comedian, and he was on set, I want to say in Georgia or Florida, someplace shooting a movie, and he called me up, and he says, hey, what are you doing? We're just talking. And I said, actually, I'm in Chicago. And he says, hey, the Dodgers are playing in Chicago right now, and LaRusse is a friend of mine, the manager of the Chicago White Sox. He says, you want to go to the game? I said, sure. He said, how many tickets you want? I was sitting next to a Chicago crowd. I said, how many tickets? And he says, 5. And I said 5, George. He says, okay.
Now, did he know 5 people that would go, or he just said 5?
No, I don't. He knew 5 people. It would be myself and him and myself, and then 3 other cop buddies that had been hanging with us. And so I told George, I hung up with George, and I told the guy, I said, okay, George says he's going to take care of it. George is a busy, busy man. He's calling me. He's on set doing a movie. And so I know he meant he's going to get me some tickets. He's going to make a phone call, but he may not be able to hook up. And he called back about 30 minutes later. He says, okay, 5 tickets that we'll call for you.
Wow.
And so we went to the game, and I'm in row 3. Row 2 had 2 seats in it. Row 3 had 4 seats in it, and row 2 had 4 seats in it. Row 3, which I was in, had 5 seats in it. I'm right in front of the on-deck circle. You could talk to the batters if you wanted to. So we're watching the game and carrying on with the cops. We're having fun. We're laughing. And a young man right in front of me all of a sudden turns around and he starts pointing his finger. He says, "I knew it was you. I knew it was you." And I said, "It's me. Yes." And he said, No. I recognize your voice and your laughter from the George Lopez show." He says, and then as soon as I turn around, he says, "Yeah, it is the guy from Netflix." He recognized me from Netflix. So here I am in Chicago at a baseball game, and the guy recognized me first for my voice and then confirmed it by sight. And he was so excited. We took all kinds of pictures for him, and he was sending them to his buddies and calling them up. FaceTime, here it is. And it just made me laugh. I said, "Partner, look at me. This is as good as it gets."
Yeah, it's got to be such a crazy difference because when you were a cop, I'm sure people were running away from you.
Sure.
And now people are running towards you asking for pictures.
Yeah, they do. It's amazing what people will do. I was in airport in Texas, which was the hub for American Airlines. Maybe been coming back from Chicago. I know I'm in Dallas, and flights were delayed. They were having bad weather. Flights were delayed, and people were in there in that airport. They were cramped. They were so pissed off. People with their dogs. Even the dogs were barking. It was ugly. And I just sat by myself and watched everybody, and I laughed. There's absolutely nothing they can do. Who are they going to get pissed off at? It's the weather that caused this problem.
Mm-hmm.
My flight was originally supposed to leave like about 11 in the morning. It's now 11 o'clock at night, and I'm finally getting on a flight to come back to LA. And so I'm up at the head of the line, and one of the employees there, the attendants, says, "Okay, sir, so let me see your boarding pass." "Okay. Hey, you're the guy from Netflix." And he wanted to take a selfie with me. He took pictures. And I finally had to tell the guy, I said, "Hey, partner," I said, "let me get in and sit down." I said, "And you can bring your whole crew and take as many pictures you want. I don't mind it. But if we don't move this line along, these people behind us are going to lynch me."
That's hilarious.
Because they're antsy. They want to get on a plane and get home.
Yeah. Does it feel a little weird to you, strangers walking up, or do you like this newfound kind of attention?
I feel humbled, and these people, if they've taken the time to watch the program or they've taken the time to take an interest to the point where they want to take a picture with me or ask for autographs, well, then I owe it to them.
Right. So let's rewind a little bit. I mean, everybody has obviously followed the Richard Ramirez case. I find it fascinating how you ended up even getting into police work. So let's take it back to your childhood. You said you were getting in quite the amount of trouble, right?
I was headed for trouble big time. I was hanging around it was a gang. We're hanging around. The boys were more important to me, hanging out on the corner
What
on
you guys
the block.
doing, selling a little dope?
No. The dope wasn't that prevalent then.
Ah, okay.
Dope wasn't that prevalent. Matter of fact, weed, Reds, and Bennies were the big thing.
Oh, shit. I don't know what any of those are.
Yeah.
You said Reds and Bennies?
Yeah, Bennies is an amphetamine, and Reds were, one was an upper, one was a downer.
So you guys are really partying.
And we just hung around together. We'd get in fights. It was our territory. We'd get in fights. None of us had guns. And none of the guys were using dope. Very few of them were using dope at the time. And if they were using it, it wasn't in mass dosage.
Right.
They took me home. They were more concerned with me getting in fights, stealing, being part of, I remember the cop, when I saw him years later, told another cop buddy of mine, man, I could remember him when he was stealing his first set of hubcaps. So it was.
And you were around what, 15, 16?
I was back on the block when I started hanging with these guys. I was around 12, 13.
Oh, shit. So you were at it pretty young.
Yes.
And it wasn't until you were 17 where your dad stepped in and was like, all right, we're signing you up for the Army.
No, it wasn't my dad who stepped in. It was a cop that took me home and told my parents, sign for this boy to get off the streets. Or he's
Now, how'd
gonna
you
end
get
up-
caught up with the cop?
He had come around. What I found out later on was good police work. Just in his regular patrol duties, he'd come around and he'd shake us down. But he did it in a fun way. Okay, everybody get your hands on the car. Let's pat you down. And he took the time to bullshit with us
That's cool.
and treat us decently. And always said, if there's anything I can ever do, he says, trying to keep you guys out of trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I was not going to pass. I was not going to graduate from high school. I was failing English. English was a required subject. And the teacher told me, you write a term paper and I'll give you a D and I'll let you pass. So you find a subject. And so I went back to him. I said, hey, you always said you wanted help. I want to write a term paper on cops. Will you help? And he did. He helped me. And he also, that's when, shortly thereafter, he took me home to my parents and signed for this boy to get off the streets.
Was there a piece of you, because you're 17 years old, did you feel kind of betrayed? You know, that doesn't sound like a 17-year-old's dream to enroll in the Army.
No, I didn't feel betrayed at all.
Interesting.
I just went in, didn't think twice about it. I was young. I wanted to, the realities are, I was looking forward to going in because I was ignorant. I was naive.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back there and avenge some friends of mine had been killed in Vietnam already. I wanted to avenge their deaths. You know, it's kind of like your homeboy. You know, hey, somebody got whacked your homeboy. You want to get the guys that whacked your homeboy.
Right.
I want to go over there and whack the boys that whacked my homeboys.
Yeah. I like the term whack. Makes it feel mobstery. Now, Vietnam, it's just so crazy looking back on it because now, today, I mean, kids don't even know what war is. I mean, we see it on TV and in other countries, but we haven't been involved in a war like that since then, pretty much. You know, and you went out there like right when you turned 18.
It was right after I turned 18, November 29th, and February 1st, I was in Vietnam.
And it was the Tet Offensive.
Tet Offensive.
Was
right.
that your first operation?
Well, it wasn't an operation. It was a time. The Tet is the celebration of their annual New Year. They just chose that time to push for a big offensive. And so that's the day, you know, it's like, okay, the 4th of July, we're going to spring it on them. We're going to surprise them, and we're going to attack from every major front that we can.
Right.
So that's what they did. They threw a lot of stuff at American bases.
I can't even imagine the type of shit you saw out in Vietnam. Like, were you operating machine guns?
I didn't see that much. You know, you're flying around, and I was operating a machine gun. I signed for a helicopter just like a cop signs for his gun. Mm-hmm. That helicopter was mine. It's up in the air, and I'm up in the air. When it's down on the ground, if it's minor maintenance, I performed it. Major maintenance was done by, we had a shop. Everybody, you know, they put it in there, and the mechanics went at it. But it was my job to make sure that the ship was flyable and had fuel and had ammunition. And you fly, and I was flying what we called slicks. And so you go in, you insert troops, you extract troops, you medevac, you resupplied them with whatever they needed. You gave them food, you gave them ammunition, and it was a troop carrier. You're just in and out and do whatever you had. And while you're doing it, sometimes we'd call them hover holes, hell holes. You're just a sitting target, you know, going down slowly and hovering or coming in and landing. And they're hot LZs. People are shooting at you.
Now, is there any anxiety that's going on during these, or are you so jacked up that you don't even feel any kind of worry?
You're totally focused on what you got to do.
Yeah.
And I learned very early on, if you panic, you die or somebody gets hurt. So you just got to focus and do what you're doing, do your job. And if everybody does their job, then everybody gets out, hopefully.
Right.
With a good luck and the grace of the good Lord, you get out alive.
Now, it was after Vietnam that you decided three things. You wanted to become a cop, you wanted to go to college, get good grades, and you wanted to get back at your now wife, Pearl.
Yes.
Which I want to get into all three of those things specifically because I find it interesting. At this time, you're what, 19? When did you get out?
I got out of the Army, not out of Vietnam. After Vietnam, they sent me to Georgia. From Georgia, I went to Germany. I was 20 years old when I got out of the Army.
Wow. And so at that point, you wanting to become a cop, was that, did you in some way like what you did out in Vietnam? And you figured, hey, I defended our country overseas. Let me defend my city in the streets.
What I wanted to do was, I knew I had matured. and I had a whole new outlook on life, a new appreciation for life. I saw how quickly life can vanish. What I wanted to do was become a cop because I wanted to give back what that cop gave me. He gave me my life. And I wanted to be able to help out some other teenager, help some other kid, and give him his life. That's what I wanted to do.
It's very amazing that you look at it that way, you know, because so many people take war very differently, but you've got a history of doing that, going through these traumatic events and somehow, some way turning it into a positive thing.
Well, I've always said I'm not the eternal optimist, but my glass is perennially half full.
Right.
Where a lot of people look at it, and I make fun of my wife. I ask her, is your glass ever half full? She always sees the negative side of things, and you can't look at life like that. And so my glass is half full. I knew what I wanted to do and set out to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in your newfound respect for education, I found really relatable. There was a point where I wanted to go to college as well. I had to contact my old high school and pull my transcripts. And oh my God, I almost started crying. It was so bad. Because now I value information. I value education. And I take the role of the student a lot more. And so I find that very relatable that you did as well. What was it about college that fascinated you? Was it the drive to become a cop and want to be more educated, or was that a separate goal?
I wanted education. That came with maturity and appreciation for real life. I wanted to go to college because college seemed like the right thing to do. And I come from a family of 7. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I had no cousins, no relatives that had ever gone to college. I wanted to go to college, and at that time I was still naive enough to think that only rich white people went to college.
Yeah.
And my college, and I went to the community college, Rio Hondo Junior College. They let me in because I was a Vietnam vet.
Oh, nice. So you didn't have to pay for it?
Well, junior college was minimal anyway, whatever the fees were. But they just allowed me to go to college.
Right.
I didn't have the prerequisite education. I was able to graduate, but I didn't have the grades, that it took, I guess. I looked, because I was embarrassed. I looked at my transcripts, and I obviously thought D stood for damn good and F was fabulous.
Yeah.
I just knew I wanted to go. And then when I went, I was now mature. So it's not like going to high school or something where you're doing stuff, God, it's work. I got to do this. No, it was something that I wanted. So I became anal about getting A's. I wanted to do the best. I wanted A's. And so that's what I did.
Now, is this where you met Bob Morneau?
No, that was when I started, that was my AA. I met Bob Morneau when after getting my AA, I went to a 4-year university in Cal State LA, and that's where Bob Morneau was a head of he was a counselor for the Administration Justice program there at Cal State LA. That's where I met Mr. Morneau. And
what exactly did he teach you? Because he plays a big part in this whole story.
He taught, I took 2 semesters of advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes from him. Required more work, best instructor I've ever had. I'd like to say we remained friends. During the Night Stalker, I had so much confidence in him that I asked the department if we could bring him on board. He was a retired FBI agent, and if we could bring him on board to help us out. And he, unfortunately for us, they gave me permission, but he was on sabbatical in Greece, so he wasn't available. Mm-hmm. The highlight for me was after the case was over with, he's back in town. I got to go visit him and tell him thank you because you gave me the education that made this case possible for me.
Well, what's crazy is just how much was going on during the time you were becoming a cop. Because there was the Hillside Strangler, there was the Sunset Strip Killers, the Grim Sleeper, the Toolbox Killers. All of that was, and Manson, of course, all of that was happening late 60s throughout the 80s. And then you get involved, and then boom, the Night Stalker. It's always so fascinating to me how Los Angeles is such a hot spot for these true crime cases.
You learn in Homicide Bureau, as long as I worked it, number one, if the case wasn't yours, don't ask anybody about their case unless it pertains to you, because the homicide investigation is confidential in nature. And so you don't have any business to know about it, don't ask. If they want you to know, they'll tell you. So you stay out of everybody else's business. No matter how big of a high profile a case it is, it's somebody else's murder. It's not yours.
Right.
All I cared about was my murder investigations. You know, I don't pay attention to other cases unless it pertains to me, unless it's my next door neighbor or something. I really didn't care. I've got enough on my plate. People, I will say this with a wide sweeping brush. Most people don't understand what it entails to be a homicide investigator, what goes through your mind. And so if you're concentrating on your cases, you don't have time to worry about what other people are doing and what's going on.
Well, that's interesting, the psychology behind that. What do you think is the necessary ingredients for being a homicide detective?
You have to have the ability to understand. You have to have the ability to listen.
Yeah.
And if you can do that and take it not as a job, but as a lifestyle, then you'll be good.
Right. Frank Salerno, your partner, was one of the guys who really busted the Hillside Strangler case.
He was very involved in the Hillside Strangler case.
Right. And what's the whole thing? I mean, it was like a little thing that they found in their eye.
I know they found fibers on the bodies and he was into reupholstering. So some of the fibers they were able to match, but it was just good old-fashioned interviews and interrogations that broke that case, and Frank did a good job.
Did you know of Frank before working with him on the Night Stalker case?
I knew that he had worked on the Hillside Strangler. I was assigned to the same team as he was. He was the unofficial leader of the team. And I went to dinner with him my first week there. That's the Netflix thing where I talk about, he asked me, what are you laughing at? And I said, nothing. He says, bullshit, what are you laughing at, kid? And I said, here I am, drinking wine, having some shit that I've never tasted before. I didn't know what it was. When 2 weeks ago, I'm eating a burrito off the hood of a radio car with the guy from Homicide and Frank Salerno. I said, it doesn't get any better than this.
Yeah.
So it was, he was well known.
I love that story, especially the burrito part, because I heard that in the making of Manhunt, A. Martinez, who played you, was walking around eating donuts the entire time, and you're like, no.
No, well, they in the script, they had him eating a donut in a stakeout in a car. And I told him, he says, is there anything in here you would change? He says, I can tell you right now, I'm going to change the clothing because I look at you. They had Frank dressing impeccably sharp, and they had my character dressing, buying clothes off the rack and putting them on. You know, it's kind of not that well. He says, I can see you dress impeccably well. And so they changed the dressing for him, and he says, is there anything else? I said, yeah, you talk about eating donuts. Everybody thinks cops eat donuts. I said, I really don't care for donuts. I said, you can have me eating anything you want. You can have me eat a taco, burrito, a sandwich, but not a donut. I mean, everybody thinks that.
Right.
And so in the movie, he's eating burrito.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it must have been such a surreal feeling watching someone else play you.
It was funny. I really shouldn't, I don't know if I say it. I really didn't care for it. Mm-hmm. Because not A. Martinez's part. He was a good guy, nice guy, but they tried to jam a 2-hour made-for-TV Sunday night at the movies and this case in 2 hours. It was impossible to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is.
And so they're just cut so much, did so much on the set. And I remember at one point in time, one of the scenes, there's about 3 or 4 radio cars on the front yard of a location. And I said, okay, that wouldn't work. You know, that shit.
Why?
I'd have somebody's ass because that's all part of a crime scene. You know, you go out there, you don't know what you're going to ruin with a car. You don't know if they threw anything away right in front of you. And he says, yeah, we know, but we need to do that for effect so we can show people how important this case was.
Right.
And I said, it's your movie, do what you got to do. And then they showed me coming out with evidence in a plastic bag. I said, that's bullshit. Wouldn't come out with something in a plastic bag like that.
Right.
Can't breathe. Could destroy evidence. He says, yeah, we know. You use paper bags or boxes. I said, exactly. And he says, yeah, but we need to show the audience what's in the bag so that way they could see what's in the bag, the evidence.
Interesting.
And so you're there advising them, but they do what they want to do.
Yeah. So what was the first case you ended up getting added to?
I got the first case in what we call the modern series. I got March 17th, 1985, Dale Okazaki and Maria Hernandez, Dale Okazaki lost her life. Maria Hernandez got wounded. That was just, matter of fact, the anniversary was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And that was my case, and I was on it from beginning till the end of it. I say the modern series because we found one after we had arrested Richard that had happened in June of 1984. It was an LAPD case.
Jenny
Vincal.
Interesting. So you found that after.
Well, I knew of the case, but we didn't know it was related until after we made the arrest.
Right.
Because they had live fingerprints, but fingerprints at that time weren't automated, so they had nothing to compare them to. Once we got them in custody, then we could compare them and realize, yes, it's one of the same. So we added that to the series.
Now, was Dale Okazaki and Silent U, was that, because that was day one with you starting everything, did you know that day, or did you have the hunch that day that it was the same guy?
It took at least a couple of days. Number one, I knew they were this. By the second day, I knew it was the same caliber weapon. And there was something different about them. Once again, going back to, I hearken back to Bob Morneau. Bob Morneau says that some people, when they pull a gun on you and stick it in your face, they're not really intending to kill you like that. They just want to see the fear in your face. They want to see that fear. That's kind of like foreplay to them for sexual activity.
Mm.
So Maria Hernandez, he made an intentional sound so she could see him coming, and before he shot her. Dale Okazaki was inside. She ended up with a contusion on the back of her head, so he struck her in the back of the head before he killed her. And then when she came up, there was a countertop in the kitchen there. She put her hands on top of it, and she's going to pull herself up. She's waiting to see if he's gone. She's listening. No noise, so she picks herself up. And he's on the other side of that counter, waiting. And he pops her. He wanted to see her face beforehand. Silent U.
Same night up the street.
Yes, he drags her out of a car. He could have killed her while she was sitting in the car, and he didn't. He drug her out. So there was just something different about them.
Now, walk me through your process as a detective. I mean, when you walk into a crime scene, what are the first things you're looking for, identifying? I mean, I read somewhere that you take down even the atmosphere.
Yes. Before you walk into any crime scene, you get there, you take note of the lighting conditions. I took weather conditions, smell. You know, what did you smell? And then you go inside, and then you start looking, you start examining, looking for things that are different or out of place or maybe disturbed, moved, knocked over.
How do you put the pieces together that Dale poked her head up from the counter and he shot her there?
Because of the trajectory of the wound to her brain inside her head, and it was shot within 18 inches, and at the level she was at, because she had already been knocked down once. And Richard told us she was stupid. She never should have lifted her head.
Oh, wow. You know, because a lot of those tapes, you know, from Philip Carlos books where allegedly he gets into a lot of the details is unheard of. A lot of it's unreleased. And so it just comes down to the detective work. And you guys had this figured out before he had even said anything, right?
No, I can't take credit for knowing all this stuff beforehand, you know, because then we don't have evidence of it. Then we surmise, you know, we're speculating with what we know from our knowledge, investigating, coupled with knowledge that I picked up in college, which made it difficult for everybody else to believe because they didn't take the classes that I did. And you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks.
Right. Yeah, Bob Morneau's class helped you a ton because, I mean, that's where you kind of got that, like, someone is just going to kill for the sexual pleasure of it. And then out of nowhere, I feel like things started to get really crazy because soon after that, you had found the Zazaras. Were you on the crime scene for the Zazaras?
No.
You didn't go to that one?
No. I was made aware of it. Two guys out of my office that were friends of mine, they handled it. And I saw pictures. I'm looking at their case because it was the same caliber gun. And the distance between the three cases of Dale Okazaki, Silent U, and now the Zazaras were not that far apart. And so I'm studying their case, and I see the Avia footprint. That's the first time we saw the Avia footprint.
And there was one at the Doy residence as well, correct?
Yes, but we didn't know about that one until after the case was getting ready to be filed.
Which is another kind of annoying thing, right? The splits between all of the jurisdictions of LA County.
Not of all the jurisdictions, some jurisdictions. In particular, Monterey Park, they wanted to have, their chief of police. It was like he wanted to be the big boy on campus, and he wanted to solve it. And he thought the sheriff's department was Big Brother trying to muscle in on him. And so they didn't share a lot of information with us. They didn't want us doing anything. Unfortunately for them, they used to use our crime scene people, our crime lab, for their investigations, but they wanted to solve the case on their own.
Right, which has historically happened. I mean, something in the Manson case also, they were withholding information from each other. When did things start to get like a bit crazy for you? I mean, obviously all of it is crazy, but there had to have been some point where you're walking into these things and you're just going, okay, we're under attack. This is happening so frequently at this point because the Doys happened. Then I believe it was Patty Elaine Higgins.
Doys happened May the 14th. Patty Elaine Higgins happened on June the 28th.
Was that ever connected definitively to Richard?
We filed it. We filed charges against him. The only problem with it was we didn't have any physical evidence that could match him, that could link him to the other ones. But we did have witnesses. He had the night before the murder, he was seen standing at a corner waiting for the light, and he had a cat draped around his neck like a pet. And the cat was black with gray hair, black and gray. And a lady came forward and said, she approached him and said, "Aren't you afraid that cat will jump off into traffic?" And she said he turned around and gave me this glaring stare, scared the bejesus out of her. Then she just left him away. He then goes in just probably about 50 yards away from where he was spotted then, went into this duplex where he kills Patty Elaine Higgins. Patty Elaine Higgins had a yapping dog, and we knew at that time, we didn't know yet. Mary Cannon was killed 4 days later, but Mary Cannon had the same wounds that Patty Elaine Higgins did.
Mm-hmm. It was like a stab slash, right?
It was cut across her throat. He was slicing her throat. I don't know what held it together without total decapitation. There was gaping wounds. There was sex involved with Patty Elaine Higgins. And the neighbor who lived in the duplex said the dog wasn't barking, and he didn't have any cats, but yet we found black and gray cat hairs inside the house, inside the residence. So it was circumstantially a good case. But when the defense team made a motion to sever that case from the others, Deputy District Attorney Phil Halpin approached the court and said, "Hey, we'll dismiss that one in the interest of justice. Let's proceed on the remaining 13.
Yeah, they dismissed a couple of things that I found were pretty bullshit, but
the only thing they dismissed was that one murder against Patty Elaine Higgins.
And the kitty cases, right?
We dismissed the kitty cases in the interest of justice again.
It was the Patty Elaine Higgins, then it went to Whitney Bennett, and then the break-in at Deputy John Rodriguez's house. It was after, I think, that point where you guys had said, okay, well, now let's start taking a look at all the unsolved murders, right?
No, it went from Patty Elaine Higgins to Mary Cannon, then to Whitney Bennett. John Rodriguez, that case, we found a footprint. Nobody got killed. Nobody got injured.
But she heard him coming into the house.
The wife did.
Yeah.
Heard the cracking of the window when he pushed the window. The house had been painted, and John never cleaned up the paint, so it was just stuck around the seals. Well, she heard that cracking. And that's what woke her up. She was asleep on the couch, and he was asleep in the bedroom. So when she said, "John, is that you?" John came walking out from the bedroom. Is what me? He says, "Somebody just tried to come in that dining room window." And he says, "That window's been painted shut. Nobody came in there." And he looked, and there's paint chips on the floor. And then you look elsewhere. Then she says, "We'll call the cops." He said, "I am a cop." He says, "No, you work in the jail. Just call the local authorities here," which is part of the sheriff's department. They went out there, and some young deputy saw the Avia footprint and put a box around it to preserve it. And that's how we knew he had been there at the Rodriguez home.
And now at this time, it's a cop. You guys, Do you remember where your head was at? Did that make it a little bit more real that this guy is, now an attempted break-in at a deputy's house?
No, that deputy's nothing but another human being. We're more concentrated on this guy, the suspect, not whose house he's breaking into. It didn't matter to us.
And when you showed up, you told him, you were like, you are very lucky this guy didn't get in.
Yes.
Wow. So it was after that, when you guys started to look at all the unsolved murders, you guys then went back and found Mabel Bell and Nettie Lang, correct?
No, Mabel Bell and Nettie Lang happened. We hadn't been looking at cases. It was in between and after he was arrested that we spent any time looking at old cases. We didn't look at them during the series itself. We didn't have time.
Oh, so you were just going to whatever you were called in at.
Yes.
Very interesting. Wow, that one hit me probably the hardest just because of how old they were. And was that where the pattern was kind of broken, where you guys realized this guy doesn't have a particular fetish or a particular victim in mind?
His only consistency was his inconsistency.
Right.
I mean, you have to remember, at this time, I'm alleging he kidnapping kids ranging 5 to 12 years of age. That's a lot different than a 40-year-old lady or a 65-year-old lady. So there's a big difference. Some he had killed with a shod foot, some he had killed with knives, some he had shot.
Yeah.
So there was differences in all the cases.
What are your partners saying? You've got this young guy who's coming in. They're probably thinking you think you're hot shit. You're trying to make a big name for yourself, and you're saying it's one guy, it's one guy, it's one guy. You said they're motherfucking you to death. They're talking shit the moment you leave the room.
Most people didn't believe in me. And most people were saying, this guy's nuts. He hadn't been around long enough. He doesn't know murders. He doesn't know this. It was people, I had friends over with Monterey Park Police Department, and they're saying, Gil, every time you walk out of here, they're motherfucking you to death. There were people in our bureau that would sit there and say, you're full of shit. They didn't get as vile as they did as some of the others, but they didn't believe in me. And the realities are that doesn't bother me because hindsight is 20/20. I wouldn't have believed in me either. What I was alleging had never been documented in criminal history. And so it's a tough nut to swallow, especially when you got somebody as inexperienced as these seasoned detectives. At this time, I'm still the youngest guy in the bureau.
Did it piss you off or motivate you?
It was more frustrated. It wasn't pissed off. It was more frustrating than anything else.
Right. Did Frank believe it in the beginning?
Frank did not believe it in the beginning. He was like others, but Frank never did discourage me, and Frank never did call me any names. Frank just didn't go along with it, and I understand that. One of my best friends today, just last year, copped out to me that he didn't buy it, and he was shocked when he finally found out that it was all true. But he wasn't bad-mouthing me, he just didn't believe it.
Yeah. It must have felt good when it was finally confirmed. You know what I mean?
Sure was. And I remember the day I was concerned, the administrative lieutenant for Homicide Bureau was a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Gil Leslie. And when we found out that some of the ballistics were connected, he said, Gil Carew, it's your turn to go out in that squad room, jump up on a desk and say, nana, 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 because you're the only one that's been right from the very beginning. And I said, we don't have time for that. We got work to do.
You didn't take one victory lap?
No.
That's good.
No.
And was it, so when did you guys end up stumbling upon the stolen Toyota where he got pulled over and he fled from the cop that pulled him over?
That was LAPD that did it. They stopped him out of, not Foothill Division, out of Northeast Division. And it was an attempt kidnapping of kids. So he didn't get anybody then. And he ran a red light and a motor officer saw him, and motor officers are a different breed, so he went after him, and he went over a little loop-de-loop before he got on the freeway, and he finally pulled over, and he ended up running from that cop, and that was a day that we found LAPD found a little cheap plastic business card holder, and it was more like for appointments, and that's where we found an appointment card for a gentleman by the name of Richard Minna in a Chinatown dental office, which led us to the dental office to see if we could identify him that way.
I love the story of that. You guys had people stationed there, and there was a day where he walked in, but the button didn't work.
We had an executive from the sheriff's department, and when executives get involved in your investigations, they don't know what they're doing. And we were spending money. We had 2 deputies in there 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And they had to be Asian, right? You guys
Yes,
made sure
they had to be Asian. That's an awful lot of overtime. It's costing a lot of money. And he finally said, okay, it's LAPD's jurisdiction where that office is. Get LAPD to put a robbery alarm in there. And that way all you do is hit the button. It goes off at headquarters and they get cops down there right away. And silent alarm. And that's what they did. They pulled him out. They put the alarm in. And the same day that they put the alarm in and our cops were out of there, Richard went back.
Mm-hmm.
And the dentist called me up that night saying, where were you guys? I kept pressing the button. Nobody came.
Did you go through the fucking roof?
I just shook my head. What else is going to happen? You don't have a bunch of time to think about a lot of stuff. You just get frustrated. The whole case was probably the most stressful thing I've ever been through.
Right.
But you don't dwell on it. You just have to keep focusing. You have to keep going. And that's just the way it is. These guys run 26-mile marathons. You couldn't get me to run 26 blocks. But yet they focus and they get through it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you got to do when you're up against adversity. You just got to keep fighting through it.
Yeah. And when did you say that you guys found out about Jenny Vinkow? Because that happened in 1984.
Before his arrest, sometime, I'd say about mid-July, when the news media started making a big deal out of the series that was going on, I got contacted by an LAPD officer, a LAPD homicide investigator that was working Northeast Division. And he said, hey, I've got a murder that occurred June of 84. It sounds like the same thing you guys are working on. And I've got a live print. I said, okay, we'll just hold on to it. Do whatever you got to do with your case. Once we get somebody in custody or once we have something to work with, then we'll compare what you got versus what we have. Richard was arrested, and then they brought their case over, and we looked at fingerprints, and they matched. We knew it was the same guy.
Yeah, because there was nothing going on from 1984 all the way till St. Patrick's Day, 1985. And it took all the way up until 2009 for them to link the murder of the girl in San Francisco as well.
That's because of DNA.
Right. Do you think from that time on, do you think that was just your typical cooling off period that most serial killers have? Or do you think there were a bunch of unsolved things in between?
Well, there were unsolved cases in between. We found some cases. I found an child abduction in January out of the city of Pico Rivera. And then we found a case probably around October, November of 84 in Arizona. But both victims survived. It was an elderly couple living in a trailer. But when I talked to Richard, the words he used to those that were surviving victims, it's, where's the money, where's the jewelry, and shut up, bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, no, I wasn't good for that. I said, Richard, come on, Ray Charles could figure this one out. This is what you said. And he just looked at me, he chuckled, he says, oh, yeah. And unfortunately or fortunately, well, I'm glad they didn't. Arizona didn't want anything to do with it. Hey, you guys got your handfuls up there. We don't need to prosecute. We'll just let it go. We don't care.
Right.
I was asked, we'll have to turn this thing. Oh, crush you Cadillac.
It's okay.
We can edit. Yeah, we can edit.
Yeah, we'll edit this.
Hello. To walk with my dad. Used to park in free parking off the Coliseum, off the stadium property, and we'd walk up a hill. And then when we got to the stadium, then we'd go all the way up to the nosebleed section, and that's where we'd sit. Unfortunately, my dad passed away, and my son is now 47, so about 45 years ago, my dad passed away. As a matter of fact, it was, I had a shot with my wife and my granddaughter. It was March 17th, this day he passed. And it was a big joke. People say, hey, Mexican, come on over here. And he'd say, wait a minute, I'm not Mexican. Smoked Irish, just a little well done.
Smoked Irish.
And he died on St. Patty's Day.
Wow. And what year?
Probably around 1979, 80.
Wow.
Because I hadn't even been transferred into homicide yet.
So this was within the decade you got out of Vietnam.
Yeah, I got out of Vietnam I got out of Vietnam in 69. I got out of the Army in 70.
Yeah.
And so 1978, 79 is when my dad passed.
What did your dad do for work?
He was a laborer. He was into construction, worked for George Miller Construction Company.
It's a real hard guy.
Hard guy. Never took a vacation, just worked. He was a hardworking man. He raised, his first father passed, his stepdad came in, and then his stepdad got run out of this small mining town because he got caught fooling around with his stepdaughter, my dad's sister. And so the local kinship just run him out of Dodge. And so my dad took over, had to be about 10, 11 siblings. And he was the man of the house. And so he ran that family. And he ran them, I understand, with an iron fist. You know, he made sure everybody was in line, everybody was out of trouble. He beat up his brother-in-law because my uncle had laid hands on my aunt. And my dad went over there and said, "You want to fight somebody? Fight me." And I understand he whipped them pretty good. And everybody was in line.
So he's a man of honor.
Yeah, and he was a man of integrity. I never heard him use any profanities. He'd be disappointed. That's all I use in life. But he has one living brother still alive who's 96 years old now.
You still talk to him?
I still talk to him. I still talk to his daughter, my cousin. And hopefully in the next month or two, I'll be able to take a quick trip back to Gallup, New Mexico to go visit him.
Good.
Before he goes on. And he sits there and he tells me, he says, "Your father wasn't my brother. Your father was my dad. My dad told him all what to do. And my mom was young and married. She would say, 'Danny, you better go chop the wood. Remember, your brother said get the wood chopper tonight.'" He said, "I'm tired of my brother telling me what to do. He's not my dad. He's my brother."
Mm-hmm.
And my dad would come home from work and he'd say, "Danny, what happened with wood? I told you to chop some wood." He said, "I was just going out to do it." And he'd go out and get it done. And so he raised them. And then I had 6 sisters. He raised us.
Was he tough on you?
No, he wasn't tough on me. He was old school Mexican. Kids weren't his job. You know, they were my mother's job to keep the kids in line. My mom was tough, but my dad wasn't. My dad was a man of few words. My dad spoke, "You better listen." He took care of business.
That probably created that desire, throughout your life to make him proud.
Yes.
Because he was a guy who didn't say much. And I could relate, I mean, I think everybody could relate. Everybody throughout life wants to make their parents proud. And it's unfortunate that he didn't get to see what soon came after. But, just like Pearl said, I mean, he had to have been with you that entire time.
Oh. There's Tiller Russell, who's the director on this Night Stalker documentary. He knew, and I emphasized to him that all I wanted to do in life was make my dad proud. And so when we watched it first time, I cried. And I laughed, but I cried. And when I cried, it was because of my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told Tiller a couple of weeks later, I said, I saw it and I cried. I said, "I now understand subliminally. You put that in there. I know my dad's proud of me." And he says, when we were going through the editing, he says, those pictures came up and I stopped it immediately, turned on the lights, and everybody in the room was crying. He says, "That's when I knew we had a winner." And he told a good story, and that's the way I felt with my dad. I remember my dad had cancer, was not doing well. His brothers were out visiting. I came home and I had an outstanding evaluation. I was transferring patrol to headquarters gangs, and it was very difficult to get an outstanding evaluation. And from patrol side at that point in time in my career, and I went to my dad's house and I showed my mom, and I didn't have to make my mom proud. My mom was proud of me. I was the only boy. I was her baby, so she was always loving me. "Oh, I'm so proud of you. I love you. You're so good." And even when I was bad, I was good to her, in her eyes.
Were you the youngest?
And no, I had 2 younger sisters. I had 4 older ones and 2 younger ones.
Usually it's the youngest one that gets that treatment.
The youngest one got that treatment from my dad.
Oh, wow.
And we bring it up to her. She still gets mad at us today saying she wasn't spoiled. I said, you were spoiled. And so I went down there and I showed my evaluation to my mom. She says, oh, my God. And she gave it to my dad. My dad read it. And he had 2 or 3 of his brothers in the living room there, and he read it. And he said, I'm proud of you, son. It's the first time he'd ever said anything like that. And he says, I'm proud of you. And my mom jumped in his ass. You mean it took 28 years of life and somebody else to say how good your son is before you could say you were proud of him? And my dad said, his response was, no, I've been proud of him for years. But part of making him a man was not letting him know and having him work harder.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there saying, Dad, you're quick on your feet. That's a great answer. You know, I wasn't buying it, but that was a good answer, Dad.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sitting there saying to myself, well, my dad passed. And his boss called him up and called my mom up and said, hey, have your son come down because every year they get a little bonus. They'd get a turkey and a bottle of whiskey for each of the employees. And so I went down. He said, send him down. I went down to pick him up. And when I went down to pick up the stuff, I walked into this little business office. It's just a trailer. And there's these 3 or 4 old guys sitting there. And I walked in, and one of them said, hey, you must be Carrillo's boy. And I said, yes, sir. And he says, oh, I'm Lino, and I'm Negro, and these nicknames that they had. And I said, oh, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I've heard of all of you through my father just talking about work, but I've never had the pleasure of meeting you. And he says, oh, your dad was so proud of you. He says, from the time you went into the Army, you came back, you started going to college. Then when you became a cop, forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was so proud of you. And that's when I knew that what he had told my mom was the truth.
He wasn't just being quick on his feet. That was what he felt.
And so it was good. Well, I went through life without him ever telling me that other than at one time. And so my whole life, I strived to do good to make him proud of me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to be proud of one. So the day we convicted Ramirez, you know, I was crying because I wish he'd have been there with me physically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was there with you spiritually, that's for sure. You know, and he's definitely got to be proud. Did you find yourself carrying over that same kind of mentality with your own kids? Like,
yes, most definitely. You know, I sit there. The other thing my dad never did, just culturally, was one of those things. The night before he passed, I had everybody clear the room. I wanted to talk to my dad alone. And I grabbed his hand. And I said, Dad, I just got to tell you this. I said, I'm letting you know I love you, Dad. I never said I love you to my dad. It wasn't a manly thing to do.
it's a hard thing to do.
And my dad put his hand on top of mine. He said, me too, mijo. Didn't say I love you. He said, me too.
Yeah.
And that was as good as it gets. That
Right.
never got any better than that. That morning, next morning he passed. And I told one of my older sisters, you know, I just wish I'd have heard my dad say, I love you.
Right.
I know he loved me, but I wish I'd have heard it one time. And she came in about a half hour later. My dad had a metal box in a closet. This metal box is nothing more than a cheap metal index file folder. And she said, you know, you question your dad's love for you. And I said, no, I didn't. I said, I just wish I'd have heard him say I love you. She said, well, let me tell you something. We're going through my dad's personal stuff with Mom, and found this metal case in there. He says, and inside this case was a newspaper. And in the newspaper was $10,000 cash, the deed to the house, all insurance papers, every important document that he needed. He left for my mom right there. And I said, yeah. And she says, and it was wrapped in a newspaper. You know what the newspaper was? I said, what's that? She opened it up. And it was an article about me, about how I was asking for help from the local citizens where I grew up at because we were starting an orphanage in Vietnam. He says the most important papers he has were wrapped up in a newspaper article about you.
Yeah. You know, There's probably so many people that could relate to that, you know, because a relationship with your father, you know, like you said, it's a manly kind of thing. You're always kind of trying to prove your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience, and, you know, sometimes even your manliness to your old man. You know?
And as a result of that, there's not a day that goes by where if I don't see my kids, even if they were angry at me growing up, I said, I love you.
It's amazing.
Every day, I love you. And as they became adults, every little baby step that they took, I'm proud of you.
Right.
Congratulations. God bless you.
That's amazing. You know, because people go one of two ways. They take the negative side of it and they kind of just project that on. You know, they pass it on to another generation. Not saying that it was negative, but they don't fix what they had wished they would have gotten. And then there's the other side where you make sure you give your children what you wanted growing up.
Yes.
And it's just so amazing to find out that that's what you are passing on to your children now.
That's what I wanted to do.
And they're clearly loved. They're on your T-shirt.
They're on this shirt. There's pictures of my kids. And one of my favorite pictures on here someplace is a picture of all of us. Oh, upper right-hand corner. It was my 70th birthday. It's the last time I blew my sax with a band that I played with when I was younger.
Yeah.
They were there with me, and it was a great night. They're on there, and then I've got pictures of my wife and myself in our Dodger jerseys. And off to the left here is a picture of Lasorda and Valenzuela after Valenzuela passed. The Dodgers won their championship, and somebody posted this on the internet, and all it was a picture of Lasorda and Valenzuela walking off as if they're walking into heaven. It says, our job is finished, or our job is complete.
I love how steeped in LA culture you are, you know, because you were there for a long time. Was your dad from LA as well, or did he?
No, my dad was from a town outside of Gallup, New Mexico. It was called Gamerco. It was a little mining town, and he worked the mines as a kid. Matter of fact, as an adult, he died eventually of cancer, and he got money because he had black lung disease from working the mines.
Oof. Yeah, it was back before we knew anything about these kind of long-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's like, who do you even blame at that point?
By the way, just let me add something right now. This red water that I'm drinking over here is a lot better than the clear water.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm drinking sparkling water and regular water. I like my sparkling a lot better. But I love that you're a man who cut their teeth in Los Angeles, and then soon after you're plastered over, you know, all the newspapers and news. And though it was for something terrible and negative in terms of the events that happened, it was extremely heroic. You know, what you guys had to do. When did the media first start to get involved?
Probably July the 7th. We had been on June the 28th. Patty Lane Higgins was murdered. News media showed up, and it's, hey, Gil, what do you guys got? And I said, routine mundane murder, 32-year-old teacher. She was found inside. Don't have much to give you right now, but doesn't look like much there. 4 days later, we're at the house of Mary Cannon, also in the city of Arcadia, where Patty Lane Higgins was from. And they said, what do you got? Well, we just got this one because it's so close to Patty Lane Higgins. And they just said, hey, since you're out here, why don't you take that one too? And once again, they didn't follow up much on it. We were obligated by operation, by policy, if there's a murder involved, we had to notify the news media. Well, in between Patty Lane Higgins, I was approached by Arcadia Police Department saying that they had also had a little 6-year-old girl that had been kidnapped out of her house. That was Anastasia Ronas. And I said, okay, well, you continue to work your kidnapping. You know, she had been, they had recovered her by then. You continue to work your kidnapping as we go along. You know, if we find out that it's connected, we'll bring it in. And so we did that. And from Mary Cannon, then we went to Sierra Madre, where we didn't have to notify law enforcement because that was on the 5th of July. It was the night after the 4th, the night of the 4th, morning of the 5th. We didn't have to notify them because we were obligated to notify them of murders. And in that case, the teenage girl that got bludgeoned was left for dead, but she didn't pass. So we were under no obligation to notify the press about that. July 7th, we had Sophie Dickman, and she was raped, sexually assaulted. She was sodomized, and that happened at 3:30 in the morning. And so went out to the residence. I got called by my office saying that Linda Arthur, at that time was her married name, she worked as a deputy for our department. She was, at that time, she was assigned to the crime lab, and she was the informant on Sophie Dickman. Sophie Dickman, who lived right across the street from Linda, drug herself to the window and started yelling for Mrs. Arthur. And then that led to Linda going over there and found out that she was handcuffed to a 4-poster bed and called the cops. So she was the informant. Well, I got notified. She called my office and told me, hey, get Gil. And I called her up and she says, hey, the lady across the street from me just got sexually assaulted, and I think it's what you're working on. Linda from the crime lab had been out to some of our cases. And so I said, okay, I'll be right out there. I didn't notify Frank because Linda was my friend and we're burning the candle at both ends. We needed rest. And so I didn't know if Linda's information was good or if she was just in a bad state of mind because her husband, my academy classmate, had just been murdered on June 1st. So now a month prior, her husband gets murdered. Now the lady across the street from her gets raped. So psychologically, I didn't know if she was all there. And so I went out there and I met with Linda, went back to my in-laws' place, took my family out to breakfast, and got notified. I told the wife, I said, allow me to sleep. Give me an hour's rest, and then I'll get up. I got to go back to work. And she just said, Gil, you can't keep doing this. You're going to kill yourself.
How little sleep were you running on?
Oh, very, very little. I mean, we're talking maybe 2 hours, 3 hours max. And that particular night, there wasn't much sleep at all. And I was getting short-tempered, which was not like me. And I just said, you're either going to wake me up or I'll call the office. They'll wake me up. And I had one shoe off and going to get some rest. And they buzzed me up. They said, you got another one. So I didn't even get both shoes off. And I just went to the next case, and that was the case of Joyce Nelson.
Where the fucking footprint was found on her face.
It was found on the side of her head. It was right there. It caused a basal fracture of her skull.
Jesus. Oh, God damn. Yeah, I mean, to do that to somebody, I mean, I imagine the pictures of these people when they were alive. Some of them just remind me of my own family members.
That's the difference between the way you think and what Bob Morneau taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in order to do the job and do it well and get people to talk to you, you have to have an infinite amount of understanding.
For both sides.
Yes, you have to understand. He did it for a reason. Understand what that reason is. And once you understand it, you don't condone it. You just understand it. And if you have an understanding of it, then it makes it easier to talk to them. So when you sit there and say, I just can't imagine, I can't fathom what would make this animal do this, I can sit there and say, I can understand he was sexually motivated.
Wow, what an interesting point between, being able to understand a certain side while also not condoning it either.
Sure, you can't condone it.
Right. Now, how does the media end up fucking with you guys? I mean, the media involvement could end up being, a good thing, which I think we kind of found at the end of the story. But at this point, it was fucking with you guys. I think, was it here where Laurel Erickson found out about the Avia shoe print?
It was about this time that Laurel found out about the Avia footprint.
Who tipped it off to her? How did she get that information?
Probably we believe from the victim when we did a search warrant on his house, and somebody in law enforcement was contacting Channel 4.
Mm-hmm.
They had an informant on law enforcement side. So they knew that we had gone out to this location. She went out there, and whenever you did a search warrant, you had to leave a copy of the search warrant there, and the copy of the search warrant tells you what you're looking for. So she had obtained the information that we were looking for this Avia shoe. She then calls up and threatens that if she doesn't get a story with us, that she's going to go with the Avia shoe print. And so she made a deal with our captain and she talked to Frank, and it was very, just as we were walking by, she got a quick statement, and that was enough to keep going and kept the shoe print out of the news media. As the case developed, Laurel and I became friends, and we're still friends today. And Paul Skolnick, who was her producer, said Laurel was never going to give up the shoe print. Laurel was good, and she was good at what she did. And in getting to know Laurel, you find out that she had sometimes had to use her beauty. She was an attractive lady, so be the nice, beautiful blonde, be the ditzy blonde that was dumb, put her right here and act dumb, and feed cops' ego, tell them how good they were, and yet just to get them to talk when she wanted information. Any trick in the book to get her story across, and she did. And she did it good.
What was the deal that was made to keep her quiet?
To allow us to have allow her to have a grab shot of the two investigators leading the case.
Interesting. And she had followed that. She was agreeing to it and everything, and then the Pans are murdered in San Francisco. You guys show up at the airport, and she's right there, also at the airport. At that point, where you're like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Somebody in the department, whether ours or LAPD, and I'd like to believe it was LAPD, was an informant, was giving her information. So she was on a flight with us.
The mayor of San Francisco, after that one, got involved, right? She leaked all the information.
She leaked the information that we had, shoe print, car, weapon, and that's the day that I really got pissed off.
Man, because that just blew your whole cover. And according to Rich, he took off his Avias and threw them off the Golden Gate Bridge.
As he did a gun.
Yeah. Oh, and the gun. Was that the 22 or the 25?
I don't well, he had both. He had multiple 22s, and he threw a gun.
I remember the red primer was in with all that. It's interesting. Nobody went and seized the shoes or went to the bottom and looked?
We didn't have that until way after the fact, after he's in custody.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of the San Francisco Bay, with currents and stuff like that looking. So we didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Which in theory, that could possibly mean that they're still down there.
Sure. Want to take a dive? Want
to take a little dip? Yeah. I mean, to find those shoes, that would probably be the most legendary find. I mean, we got people diving down to go see the Titanic. Also another national tragedy.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. I just want to stretch.
Perfect. I got to actually... At what point did you guys start the task force? Was it actually a task force, the best of the best coming together to try and solve this murder? Was that overhyped for the show?
No, we brought in people probably right after, we started bringing them right after July the 5th, right after Whitney Bennett. And so when we picked the best of the best, we took, I believe the number was like 24 investigators from Homicide Bureau. Those were the best of the best in Homicide Bureau. To fill in behind him, we brought people from an outside unit. At that time, they were called Metro Division. And these were investigators, but not homicide investigators. And what we did was we pulled our homicide investigators to work on the task force. We brought those investigators in from Metro and assigned them to backfill behind the 24 we had pulled out. So it's one homicide investigator, one guy from Metro. And part of their Metro team was working phones, writing up clues, and that's when we formed our own task force. Aside from that task force, we also had surveillance teams available to us, and we had them doing surveillances. We had them working operations out there. That was all within our department. We never did have a joint task force where all agencies were involved working together. We communicated with LAPD. We had a great working relationship with the Los Angeles Police Department, and we spoke with them on a daily basis. All other agencies, we told them, work your own cases. As we come together, then we will find out what we need or what we're missing. Some departments, like Arcadia Police Department, they don't have a homicide bureau, so we were doing their cases anyway.
Right.
Glendale Police Department, they had their own department, and they worked their own cases.
I believe Diamond Bar didn't have a homicide department either.
They were Diamond Bar was under Sheriff's Department jurisdiction. It was an incorporated city that contracted to the Sheriff's Department for all law enforcement duties, and so Diamond Bar would have been handled by us anyway.
Right. Now, in the forming of this task force, was the intention just so now there is a free-flowing amount of information going on, or?
We wanted to put as many people that were qualified, and these investigators that were brought in, they were there to follow up on clues. We had we had a clue manager that was taking in all these clues. He would write them up, then assign them, and he'd give them to a couple of investigators and go out and follow up on this.
Right.
So that's what they were doing. It wasn't for a free flow of information. It was just merely follow up on these clues.
But at this point, there's no denying that it was one person. Everybody was on board. Frank, all your partners, the task force.
No, not everybody. Everybody wasn't involved until the day that we came back with the firearms. We knew there was a serial killer, and then when we came back with the firearms ballistics information later on, tying the guns from Silent U to Dale Okazaki to the Zazara case to the Sun Valley LAPD's case, the Peterson, and then they knew it was one guy.
Right.
But prior to that, they knew knew we had serial killer, but wasn't really. Everybody still wasn't on board with one guy.
What changed though? Because in the beginning, I remember they were saying that the bullets that you guys had. I remember, I think somebody said, I can't confirm that it was from the same gun, but I can't deny it either. Was it just the red primer?
The bullets were so destroyed from going through the body cavity, it was tough to go ahead and match them to another gun unless you had the gun. Mm-hmm. The red primer, the pink primer, it was actually on there. That was to the 25 auto, and those were they were not factory bullets. Those are reloads. And they were very old reloads. And that pink, I would imagine, I guess it's kind of the gluing, when they stick the primer back in there to reload them. That's what it was there for.
And it was the same day that you guys were forming this task force that you guys got called about the Petersons, which, I mean, how unbelievably coincidental.
We got called about the Petersons because we had already, we had a meeting. The FBI had come out here from Quantico, Virginia, to try and lend us a hand, see if they could help profile the case. So we had different agencies. It wasn't a task force. The different agencies had victims or some kind of connection to the Night Stalker series. They all got together at LAPD and at their academy, and that's when Paul Tippett and myself left the academy to go to the Petersons' house because they had just been hit the night before.
Mm-hmm. And then the Abawaths happened shortly after.
Yes, sir.
How close was that to your house?
Yeah, it was within 5 minutes.
And was it at this point when Pearl was like, okay, you know what? I'm done with this. Enough is enough. I'm getting out of here.
She woke up. She's, where are you going to this time? And I said, I'm going to Diamond Bar. And then I went into the shower, did shave and shower and come out, I'm getting dressed. She says, Gil, because I've been known to joke around. I lie for everything and jestingly lie. And so she says, where are you going? I said, I told you I'm going to Diamond Bar. She says, Gil, there's nothing to joke around about. Where are you going? And back then we didn't have GPS. We didn't have, these things. You had Thomas guides. So I said, here's the address that I wrote down. Here it is on the Thomas guide. And she says, oh my God. And she was wide awake now. And I said, hey, well, now that you're awake, it's 4:30 in the morning. I said, not right now, but I go back to sleep. And I said, you get up later on, go to the market, and buy a bunch of food. And I said, maybe around 3 or 4 o'clock, I'll bring some guys down here. Maybe 10, 15 people, we'll have some lunch. And my wife, who I affectionately refer to as Sister Mary Clarence, who doesn't use profanity, looked at me and she said, bullshit. I'm leaving. Me and the kids are gone. And we're not coming back till this is over. So she left that morning.
Is there a little piece of you that's scared, like, oh shit, now I got to sleep in this house by myself?
No, not at all. At that time, I'm totally focused on the case. I don't think about much else other than that case.
Well, I love the story about how you were home alone one night and the phone rang and you jumped a foot out of your chair.
That was on July 7th. That's when Linda Arthur asked me to call, and that's because that night, as depicted in the Netflix thing, I believe, it shows me walking around with a gun, clearing my house. I was asleep, and
you thought he was in your house?
I thought he was in my house, so I cleared my house like a good burglar. I went house to house, and I'm nauseous, I'm breathing heavy, I just don't feel good. I'm sweating, and I got back in bed, and I couldn't call the cops because the cops' jurisdiction there was sheriff's department, same department I worked for, and if they came down and there's nobody inside this house, they're going to say Gil's gone off the deep end.
Right. Do you think you would have blown his fucking head off, or you would have detained him?
Oh no, I'd have shot him. At that point in time, I can't say I would have. You can't panic. You got to think straight. And if I had an option, and I could have taken him into custody by myself, I would have taken him into custody. Mm-hmm. But that's an awfully big request when you know how much destruction he's done, how quick he is, how badass he is. So if he'd have fart, flinched, burped, or sneezed, I'd have killed him.
Yeah. How did you adjust to the type of violence, though? I mean, how many murder cases did you work before all this stuff was going on?
I worked several, a few hundred murder cases, but it's not, you don't adjust. Every case is an individual thing, and it's law enforcement. Mm-hmm. You train, you study, you prepare, and that's how you stay alive.
Yeah.
And you don't panic. If you do, it's no good. People get in trouble.
Right. Well, I was so interested in learning about the fact that the homicide detectives that go and investigate the case have to attend legally the autopsy.
Well, no, it's not legal. It's policy.
Policy.
Our department says you will attend your own autopsies.
Yeah. And you've got to sit here and watch, autopsies are not a pretty sight. They got to slice open the body, break open the rib cages, take out all the organs. And, in this case, bullets as well.
When you first start, it's nauseating, it's eye-opening, breathtaking, and it's grotesque. After a few autopsies, and after you've been there for a while, they become very scientific. You're looking for stuff. You don't see the blood, the guts, and the gore. You're looking for something in particular.
Do you think anything in Vietnam or your previous murder cases has kind of built a little bit of a thicker skin towards stuff like this?
I'd seen a lot of death in Vietnam. I'd seen a lot of death on the streets before I became a homicide cop. But it's looking at it like a doctor, a doctor who's not in his office, who's with his girlfriend.
Right.
He looks at her as a sex object. They're going to make love tonight and they're going to be excited. And he's in the doctor's office tomorrow examining another female, and he's not breathing heavy. He's not excited. It's scientific. So take me out of my element, and something might look grotesque, but when it's work, it's scientific.
The magnitude of pressure at that point, because now Pearl leaves the house with the kids. The whole city is under fear. What are you feeling like in this moment? Do you have this concept of this is all on my shoulders? I need to work, and I need to work fast to get these murders to stop happening.
I didn't care about Pearl and my kids. I didn't care about anything else other than solving the case. The pressure was on to solve the case. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of residents in Los Angeles County needed me. My family needed me because they were in danger. My colleagues needed me. So it was all about the case. That's all I cared about. That's all I thought about.
Right.
Didn't have time to think about personal feelings.
Now, the picture you guys attained of Richard Ramirez was eventually what ended up breaking the case and getting him caught. But how did you guys get the picture?
He was the car that was used down in Mission Viejo a week before his arrest. That car was recovered in the city of Los Angeles. That car had a fingerprint on it. that fingerprint was sent to the Department of Justice. They had to manually search because they weren't automated at the time. Only felons were automated, and he had no felony convictions.
What does automated mean?
That means computerized. You know, put the print in a computer in a database, and it pops up, this is who it is. That was only if you were convicted of a felony during that time. Richard had never been convicted of a felony.
He was busted for what, like a...
GTA, but convicted on a misdemeanor, not a felony. But a stolen car at that time was no big deal. You know, if you didn't have an arrest record, and he didn't, then let it make a deal, go let it be a misdemeanor. And so at the same time that this was going on, San Francisco Police Department up there found a gentleman by the name of Armando Rodriguez. And Armando Rodriguez was a friend of Richard's. So they picked him up, and they're the ones that were able to obtain a last name for Richard Ramirez. So DOJ was instructed, look for Richard Ramirez. They found 8 of them. One of them matched the fingerprint that was found on that stolen car.
Yeah, I'd imagine finding a Richard Ramirez in Los Angeles is as complicated as finding a John Smith.
Exactly.
It's like such a common name.
Exactly. And they found 8 of them, but none of those had felony convictions either. So they found one, matched the print, and that's our guy. They found out our informant had said he had been arrested a little over a year prior for GTA right there by LAPD. And so the one arrest that he did have that they matched the print to was the picture was taken during booking from an LAPD arrest for GTA.
And you guys knew to connect the San Francisco murders because it also had that pink primer, I believe. On a 25, it was a pink primer. Something got back out to you guys. You guys were called. Hey, I think this is connected with what's going on out there.
We got called, and he had pentagrams up there. And
Jack the Knife.
And I don't remember the caliber of weapon.
You guys got a radio as well, right? Mabel Bell's radio?
We recovered that. Yes, we did.
Now, that was somebody calling in and saying, hey, I was given this, or did you guys recovered it from a scene?
When we put out the reward for the arrest and conviction of Richard Ramirez, we had somebody, a female, come forward and said, hey, my dad knew him. This was a guy named Jesse Perez. And she says, my dad, Jesse Perez, knew Richard. They were friends. So we started looking, we brought Jesse in because now there's money involved. You know, they want to collect on a reward. So Jesse confesses that Richard gave him a bunch of stuff, some jewelry, a radio, and a gun. And he had taken that stuff down to Tijuana, and which is right there on the California border, and he gave it to his girlfriend. She had it all. So we had 2 investigators fly down to the border and then cross the line and went and recovered a radio, some jewelry, and a gun. And the radio that was recovered was one that belonged to Mabel Bell that was given to her by her son or nephew.
Now, at that point, are you guys taking this radio and showing it to every single victim until somebody says, I recognize it?
No, we had serial number on it.
Oh, so what was the conversation like going to Mabel Bell's son or nephew?
Michael Griggs.
Mm-hmm.
They flew down and they recovered the stuff. They're the ones that followed up, and we were able to contact the family. They were able to contact a family member of Mabel Bell because the nephew had reported that the radio had been taken. So now they have this radio, and they match a serial number, so they contact him, and he's got the receipt. So that's how we made the radio.
Right. Yeah, I found it fascinating that was one of the parts. They covered that in the Netflix documentary, but they didn't cover Felipe Solano at all, which I found one of the most revelatory parts of the entire case. Because was it after you had captured him, or was it before you had captured him, where Sandra Hotchkiss was involved? The whole thing with, entrapment.
That was before.
That was before. Okay, so before Richard was in custody, you guys had infiltrated his fence's house. Now, a fence, for people who might not know, are just a guy you offload your shit to who buys it from you. Did you go? Did you attend?
I didn't go down there the first day. They made me aware of where it was at, and so we went down and took a look. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't remember what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a highlight for me. You know, it was just part of the case.
I thought it sealed the deal, though. You know, being able to fucking like finally lock in on the place where all of the belongings that you guys know have been
What
missing.
sealed the deal? Footprint, firearms, positive identification by surviving victims, clothing descriptions. You know, everything was. It's like a conductor, you know, putting together the orchestra.
Right. And Rich was only caught a few weeks later. And I love that because it played out like a movie. The guy gets on the Greyhound bus, goes out to Arizona to visit some family. The day the guy gets back to Los Angeles, there's already helicopters out searching for him. His picture is publicized everywhere. People are recognizing him on the street. He takes a stop at a liquor store, and I think, what was it? People were chattering in the back. Did he hear something, or was that later?
He walked into the liquor store. He got off the Greyhound bus, went inside. The informant had told us that Richard would make the cops in there. He says, cops can look dirty, but they're not dirty. Their hair's not dirty. They don't smell. Their teeth aren't rotten. Just their clothes are jacked up. Richard will make them in a heartbeat. So he got off the Greyhound bus the way passengers from the bus go into the lobby. As soon as he walked in the lobby, he knew that this ain't right. So he walked out the same way he came in.
How did you guys know to put people up at the Greyhound station?
Because the informant told us that was that was home base for him.
And who was the informant? Was it Sandra?
The informant is now no. Sandra was useless.
Yeah, I know you didn't like her at all.
This was an informant, and I can't even remember the name. He died while Richard was in custody.
Oh shit!
Matter of fact, Richard told us he was dead, and he said I learned from the streets. He's dead. He OD'd. We were trying to find. They did not America's Most Wanted. Robert Stack had a program, Unsolved Mysteries, and so they did a special airing for us looking for that informant. And Richard's idea said, put it out there, even though he's dead. You know, he still had a wife and kids. Maybe they could use the money. We were trying to find to give her money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that informant is the one that told us Richard used to hang out. He used to caper with Richard before he started killing.
That's where he offloaded a lot of his shit, too. He sold these belongings.
He's the one that led us to Felipe Solano.
Right. Yeah, which, I still think is one of the most interesting parts of the entire story. And mind-blowing that it wasn't covered in the case. Hearing from you, though, that it wasn't as important as it is when you're reading it in a story and it's unraveling.
You can't put everything that's involved in it, in a documentary, in a film. There are so many facets. It's so complicated to put everything together. It's impossible to, what may be important to you may not be important to somebody else, and they have a job to do to fit it in.
Right.
The documentary itself, for them, you find it fascinating that they left it out. Didn't do bad as a documentary.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah. I think it's one of the best documentaries Netflix has ever made, if not the best, in my opinion. So detail me through him getting caught on Hubbard Street, because what poetic justice, right? I mean, the guy who's been terrorizing the community was caught by the community. As a cop who's been chasing this fucking guy, who's been stressed out, your family's moving out of the house. Did it kind of piss you off that the community stepped in and caught him, or were you just happy that he was in custody?
No, it didn't matter to me who caught him. I just wanted him off the streets, and he got caught due to his own mistakes. He's the one that screwed up, and he's the one that got his picture on the newspaper. He's the one that got off the bus and started running and then tried to steal somebody's car that he shouldn't have, and they hit him with a pipe, and he's exhausted. They fought him. He ran a few houses down. The community didn't put the boots to him. He just went down, and they encircled him, and he gave up.
Yeah.
He was exhausted. They got money for it. We divided up the reward money, but it didn't really matter who caught him. That was never a problem. And half of me wanted him dead. The other half wanted him alive because I wanted to spend time. I wanted to talk to him.
Well, where were you at when you found out he was caught and in custody?
I was on the road already, coming back to work, doing some work, and they told me he's in custody. And then it was at Hollenbach Station. When I went to Hollenbach Station, we spent some time there. And when it came time to transport, we went down to the basement. They wouldn't allow us to leave until they got more reinforcements. The crowd had grown so big. And then we were told that there was somebody out there that perhaps was going to snipe at him. And so Richard was put in the back seat with my partner and Leroy Orozco from LAPD. Paul Tippin was driving, and I was the passenger, and I was the gun bearer. We had guns in the front. That was him. He knew who we were, and I knew without saying that's who it was, and I'd never seen him before.
Oh, yeah, because he was following the news.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he had referred to himself to one of the victims. He said, "I am the Night Stalker."
That was in Mission Viejo.
Yeah. What did you want to know from him?
Well, everything about him, what made him, if I could find out anything about the case itself that I didn't know that we needed to help with the prosecution, and then help me out with future murders.
You ended up finding that he was like oddly intelligent and charismatic.
He was probably the most articulate murderer I've ever investigated, ever had a chance to interview.
Well, you always hear about his eyes. Is that true, or is that full of shit?
An old adage, don't judge a book by its cover, because you look at people and say, oh, God, he looks scary. And then it turns out he's the nicest guy in the world. I remember as a young cop, I remember as a young kid, my grandmother had a restaurant in the city of San Bernardino, right on Mount Vernon Avenue, which was a main thoroughfare back there. She had a little restaurant. And when I was a kid, guys from Hells Angels used to go in there. And I was scared to shit. I was scared to death of bikers. And so I became, I'm a cop now. And now guys from some of the biker gangs would drive through East L.A. And I remember being called to a big event where it was a it was a swap meet, but it was all bikers in there. And they called me. I was working. They called me on the radio, get down there. They had a fight. So I went down there. They had cops already on the inside. And when I got there, they're flashing 4 fingers, which normally in cop talk, that's code 4. Everything's okay. And I told my partner, I said, okay, cancel all further units. He says, code 4. And the guy looked at me, he said, no, not code 4, 4 more units. We need 4 more units. And so I said, shit, what the hell they got? We went inside and they got all these bikers in there. And a small contingent of cops that are encircled. They have a circle around one guy. And I get there and the sergeant says, Gil, am I glad you're here? We're taking this guy to jail. He's going. He says, we need to get our way out. We need to fight our way out of this mess.
Shit.
And so I'm saying, holy Jesus, what are we doing? So we go. And I just knew, I could already envision in my head being in my hospital bed looking at a Playboy, and we started going out and I started swinging this new, they were called Monadnocks or PR-24s. These are the batons that had the handles on them. You'd swing them back and forth. So we had them brand new and I started swinging mine back and forth as we're leading out. The guy that had the suspect, he had his like a tomahawk and he was getting ready to beat the shit out of him. And so we're on our way out and the crowd is starting to roar. I could see bikers picking up chains off the ground. And the one sergeant that called everybody over there to help him out, he had a shotgun in his hand. And he racks one in and he's just going out with me. And we got everybody out. And we called for backup. Our SWAT team came and it was a big mess. And I just knew this was over with. And bikers, once again, it was this thing from since child. I was afraid of bikers. And then while working patrol one day, I arrested a biker. And when I arrested this biker, and he was just small in stature, and but still, I was a little intimidated by him. Took him, booked him, and when I'm booking him, he started unlayering his outside jacket, inner jacket, shirt, T-shirt, everything he had on him. And I realized this is nothing but a small little piece of shit that gets in trouble. And there's no need to be afraid of them. They're just human. And there's no doubt in my mind I could have kicked his ass if I needed, if the fight was on. But yet to see him in his regalia, I was intimidated by him.
Right.
So you don't judge a book by its cover. So what looks evil to some may not look evil to others. And I didn't look at evil or good, because if you look at Ted Bundy, who is a very ferocious killer, he was a handsome young man, didn't look evil at all.
Represented himself in his own case.
And the judge said, it's too bad he got in trouble. He'd have made a great litigator.
Now, what was your first, do you remember your first conversation with him?
I carried most of the conversation because culturally I could speak like him. We talk like him. So it's kind of like We did the talking.
Was Frank there?
Yeah. But the first thing Frank did, Frank knew that this was a very, very important case. So the first thing he did, so as not to screw anything up, he said, okay, before we talk to you, I need to advise you your constitutional rights. So he did. He Mirandized him. And the first thing Richard did was, I want an attorney. So all bets are off now. Gil Creel works differently. Did then, still would, if I had the choice, I'd still do it today. And if you were the suspect, hey, Brandon, my name's Gil Creel. All I'm going to do is, I said, we want to talk to you, but before we talk to you, I need to get down some basic information. First name, last name, date of birth, where do you live, just do this. I said, now, Brandon, now I want to talk to you about the case, but I want to make sure that we don't violate your rights because you have some rights granted to you by law, and that is, and if you agree to these rights and if you waive your rights, then we can talk to you. If not, we'll just let you go. And no harm, no foul. You're not going to piss me off one way or another. You got to do what you got to do, and I got to do what I got to do. Now, you have the right to remain silent. And that right to remain silent means you don't have to talk to us. You have the right to an attorney. And if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you free of charge. Do you understand that? You don't have to talk to us, and if you can't afford an attorney, we'll give you one for free. And as I was explaining, do you understand your rights? Yes. Do you want to talk to us now? So this is after I've established a little rapport without showing him that I'm pissed off or that I have personal feelings or anything else. Frank went in, and Frank did what he thought was right, and that was advising him of his constitutional rights to make sure that his rights weren't violated and we didn't get the whole thing thrown out. And so we did that, and he invoked. So we started to get up. He said, okay, all bets are off. We'll see you later, Rich. And got up. He said, wait a minute, I have some questions. Well, you can ask us questions. We'll go ahead and we'll listen to what your questions you have.
Does that forfeit is that now a reason to believe that he's willing to talk at that point?
No.
Okay.
What it says is anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Richard talked to us in the third person that first day.
Oh, Jesus.
That means he would sit there and say, well, the Night Stalker may have done this. The Night Stalker may have not ever admitting that he was the Night Stalker. Anything he said could and would be used against him if we used it. But if we didn't use it, there's no violation. And so everything he talked to us about that day, none of it, not one piece was used in the case in chief against him.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, the judge that heard the preliminary hearing, who I'd love to speak to him face-to-face today to tell him he was so full of shit.
Judge Tynan?
No, Tynan was good. This was Judge Smith. I want to say his name was Peter Smith, who heard the preliminary hearing. When he heard that we talked to him after he had invoked his constitutional rights, I said it was the worst violation of Miranda he had ever seen. And he's so full of shit.
On your part?
Yes, for doing that, because the fact of the matter is we can't use anything against him in a court of law unless he's taken the stand. If he takes the stand and says something contrary to what he told us, then we can use what he told us in rebuttal to what he said. Richard never took the stand, but it didn't make a difference because we never used anything he said against him in the case in chief.
Right.
So it really did make a difference.
Yeah.
And we hadn't violated his rights.
Now, did he reveal anything?
He talked about certain thing, but there was nothing revelating. We just listened to him, let him talk. You let him talk, and you're not bothering him. You're getting information. You're gathering information. You're getting.
But in that moment, did you know that this was the guy, or was there a little doubt in your head that said,
no,
maybe it's
he
not?
was him. There was no doubt in my mind that's the killer.
Right. Because there's that whole thing of you're innocent until proven guilty.
You're innocent until proven guilty. That's stuff for television and anybody else.
Yeah.
I knew he was guilty.
I love learning about that, though. What's dramatized and what isn't. I mean, that's the juice I'm kind of looking for, right? And I do find it so weird how particular the justice system is in terms of evidence, or like when he forfeited his right to speak. Evidence plays a big role in that as well. Like they'll throw out evidence depending on how it was attained. I believe when he was at the Greyhound bus station, or when he got off, he had a locker with a black sling bag inside of it. And that was kind of up for debate whether that was legit evidence or not, because there wasn't permission from the police to go and access that locker.
The only thing that was ever in question, thrown out, and I can't even remember her name right now. You just mentioned it. Her trash was proven just that. It was garbage. She never should have been there in the first place.
Sandra.
She never should have been there. She was a useless hype informant. The first time I saw her at the station, and Sergeant Yarbrough, who had just brought her in, and that was his informant, and I made him get her out of the station. I said I wouldn't have her. Get her out. I don't want anything to do with it. Don't ever bring her around here again.
Mm-hmm.
I've never discussed it with anybody, but I believe John backdoored me and got her in, and she got in to testify, and it was bullshit testimony. It was the only problem we had with the case.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the trial ended up being a complete circus, or at least the way it was written, because you can't find much about it online anymore. I know that the whole trial was televised, but you can't go back and see them. They've been taken off of line. And Cynthia Hayden, I thought, was a very interesting part of this whole story. Somebody that you sat back and analyzed in court as all this stuff was going on. She had hard eyes for Richard, right? One of the alternate jurors.
Cynthia Hayden brought, I don't know if they were cookies or cupcakes. She brought them in for everybody except for the prosecution side.
Oh, Jesus. And yeah.
She brought them in for the court staff, for the defense, for the jurors, but none for the prosecution.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know that she had eyes. She was brought on as a juror. I don't know, because she voted for his conviction. And she voted, you know, he got the death penalty.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after, you know, that they started a relationship. She became a private investigator in order to go visit him, to spend time with him, working for his appeals attorney. So whether she had eyes for him before or not, you know, she voted guilty and voted death penalty.
Now, when you are sitting in court and you've seen all these fangirls who are walking and swooning over Richard, you see all these Satanists coming in support of Richard, are you aware of how big that fan base was about to become?
I wish I remember the guy's name. It was famous, Duvet something. He was a leader of a satanic cult down there. Whatever his last
Anton
name.
LaVey.
Yeah, that guy, Anton. He showed up. From his followers that were with him, they showed up a few times. I didn't care. You know, you can bring anybody you want. You could have brought Lucifer in himself. I didn't care. I had a case to put on as long as the case is going good.
Mm-hmm.
All the women that followed him, that was on them. Some very beautiful, very pretty ladies. There was one during preliminary hearing, Bernadette, Filipino girl that was there every day. And so I asked him after, I said, whatever happened to Bernadette? And he said, well, she tried to talk me back into Catholicism and I wouldn't go for it. Last time I talked to her, she was doing porno. He talked her into porno. So,
Jesus.
You know, I don't know. I didn't care about any of them. I saw some of the photos in the jail cell of women that were writing him, and some nice looking women.
I heard of some other crazy shit about his jail cell. This might just be a rumor, but there was a guy on death row, and he was explaining what Richard Ramirez was like in prison, and he often drawn this comparison between what a convict is and what just a regular prisoner was. And convicts were kind of, you know, made for crime. These were guys who didn't give a shit. They're cutthroat. And then you've got these prisoners who are just kind of like sunflowers. You know, they didn't belong in that area. And how Richard was kind of always a prisoner. He was never a convict. He got his ass beat every time he left his cell. But he befriended Lawrence Bittaker, allegedly, which was the toolbox killer. And is it true that if you are an inmate facing death row, you have all access rights to all of your crime scene photographs, evidence that was turned in, anything that's held against you, you're able to request as an inmate?
Richard would have, if he's working on his defense. You have access. If it's your case and you're working on your defense, they've got to give you access to it.
Right. But yeah, it was said that basically him and Lawrence Bittaker had to peddle porn to not get their asses kicked, you know, because they were some of the most hated people. And the guy who was given the interview, and you gave me really interesting insight that I'll get into after, but He mentions that when he went to go look at Richard's collection, that he was flipping through these pages of porn, things that he would cut out of porn magazines, but it was pasted next to his crime scene photographs with obscenities scribbled on them, like bitch and slut and the stuff that he said to his victims. I found it so fascinating that this guy was still this creepy, squirrely little piece of shit still. He was still the Night Stalker in San Quentin prison.
One thing you learn that you haven't learned yet, and you mentioned the Toolbox Killer. There's a gal, Laura, I can't remember her last name. She did a documentary on the Toolbox Killer. And she came out here from the East Coast and she spent a lot of time together. She wanted to learn more and more about what she was going to take on. And she spent days, and they did a documentary on this Toolbox Killer. But what you find about inmates, former inmates, they'll give you a story and they'll tell you anything. It's easy to lie to anybody as long as you tell them what they want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they're called cons. So all the stuff that any of those inmates are putting out about who did what and who did this and their personal feelings, and they know because they spend time with them, I never paid attention to them because I'm skeptical of anything they have to say.
Right. Well, it would make sense that they would make it up. They're so fucking bored in prison.
I never knew about his collection of all these photographs you're telling me about. I never knew about any of that stuff. But I really didn't care. If it wasn't going to enhance my investigation.
Were you sure he was going to be guilty the whole time?
Well, as the case was developing, yes. And I knew that we were going to beat him. We just had him. There was too much stuff we had against him.
Right.
And we had to, the first case that came across when they were reading the verdicts was Jenny Vincow. And once they read guilty to Jenny Vincow, tears started coming down my cheek because then I knew we got Jenny, we got the rest of them. And so I knew we were going to get him. There was just too much connecting evidence. So it was not. As long as you could stay up with the case, then we knew he was guilty. And we knew they'd find him guilty.
What was the whole thing with the tainted lineup? Because you always hear about the number 2.
It was, if I go like this right now with my hand, and you looked at my hand, and then they stopped it frame by frame, you may notice that as I was coming and opening up my hand, 2 fingers show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was that quick. It was a millisecond where you see 2 fingers before he gets the rest of them open. And that was Higginbotham, who ran that part of the lineup. And they tried to show that he was showing everybody in the lineup that it was number 2, and it was thrown out. It wasn't accepted.
Did he have to take the stand?
Yes, he did.
And testify that he saw the number 2?
He didn't see the number 2. The defense was raising the issue that he intentionally put up 2 fingers.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no, I didn't. They broke it down frame by frame, and you could see what happened when he came up like that. 2 fingers showed, and so it was a nothing in court. It was thrown out.
Yeah, because I remember reading that and thinking that must have meant that somebody from law enforcement had to have technically joined the defense. So it's good to learn that that's not how
nobody. It was
out.
just the defense brought it up.
Mm-hmm. Now, when he got the conviction, you said that when they read out Jenny Vincow and he was guilty, you said that tears started immediately rolling down your face.
Yes.
Why exactly was that? I mean, was it tears of joy?
I was a sissy. I don't know. There's so much stress that has gone behind this thing. And this came to the ultimate moment. Did I win or did I lose? From a guy who they didn't believe in the beginning. And all of a sudden, guilty, I became a winner and all the hard work was worth it.
Yeah, that is amazing, man. Yeah, a young guy in a case so enormous, saying the same thing from March 17th all the way up until, I mean, dude, the trial happened in January of 1989, right?
Yes, that's when the trial was.
Yeah, so that had to have been just...
I guess the analogy is no different than watching somebody win the World Series and crying over the victory.
Right.
And just emotionally, you've worked so hard to get to that day, and you've accomplished it, and you're just so happy. Everything was worth it.
Right. Did you guys know, like, you guys had to have also known that this definitely has to be the guy, because the murders were happening pretty rapidly right after each other. And then as soon as you guys got him in custody, they halted, completely stopped.
That just in other people's minds may have said, oh, look, they stopped. Maybe they were right. It was never a question in my mind.
Interesting. So that wasn't an observation, like after you guys locked him up finally, they just stopped.
Not on my part.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to learn, though, you know, because there's a lot of these true crime books that we'll read, and we almost hold them as legal documents. You know, everybody thinks because Helter Skelter was written by Vincent Bugliosi, he was the prosecutor on the case, he has to be telling the truth. But there's a level of fiction in that. You know, they're playing these things up because they want book sales.
I don't know. I've never read the book. I'm not a reader. I don't read. So I
never even read Philip Carlos.
I never read Philip Carlos' full book.
It's amazing.
You know, I will say this, and I don't wish to badmouth anybody, but O.J. Simpson, when O.J. Simpson was convicted, and I knew both investigators were lead investigators on the case, who were friends of mine. I had talked to them. I even called them up with a lead, within some information. And I said, how's it going? They said, Gil, if this weren't O.J. Simpson, the money he has, this would be over with. The guy's dirty as all get-go. So I watched the case, and when he came back guilty, I was nauseated. I couldn't watch TV for 2 weeks. And not until I finally heard some lady say, it's okay. When O.J. meets his maker, he won't have Johnny Cochran next to him. So I said, okay, I can live with that. So I was bitter, because I always said money would never be able to buy yourself a not guilty plea, and certainly not in my case. Well, they had an investigator, you know, with all the attorneys, they found an investigator that found an author who had interviewed Mark Furman, and where Mark Furman had testified he had never used the N-word, and now openly they've got it on recording. So everything he testifies to can be thrown out of, you know, they instruct the jury. If he's lying here, you can assume he's lying through anything you want.
Well, you could go to prison for that too, right? That's sworn perjury.
That only if you did it intentionally to hinder the case. You know,
how do you prove intention?
It's got to be, if you tell somebody, yeah, I'm going to say I never said this and I did it. You know, it's a difficult, perjury is a really difficult thing to say. Did you do it? Did he say that because he forgot that he had talked to the author? How do you prove that he didn't forget? How do you prove that he did forget? You know, perjury is a tough one to prosecute under. So he screwed up the case, and I knew by the amount of evidence they had that he was dirty. No doubt in my mind, O.J. Simpson was responsible for the death of those two people. Then there was a Netflix documentary out about 2 months ago. And I watched it, and I saw some of the stuff that came out in that documentary as to the evidence collection and what was done. And photographs, you know, simply stated, the gate, there's blood drops on the gate. When they photographed it the day of the homicide, there's no blood droplets. A couple of days later, that somebody discovered them. Now they take pictures of the blood droplets that weren't there the first day.
God.
You know, a black sock of his in a bedroom that was there in the open. They didn't collect it because they didn't see any blood on it. But yet, when they pulled that sock in as evidence later on, passed along to the jury, you see crusted blood all over it. Mm-hmm. And some of the blood they did find, including the one on the gate. Every time you give blood at a doctor's office, you see them shake the little vial that the blood goes in, because there's a chemical in there, it's an anticoagulant. Well, they found that the blood that was taken off the fence had that anticoagulant in there.
And, oh my God.
So they also found it in the sock too, which means it really gives the appearance that it was planted. And so and I told my wife, if I'd have been sitting on the jury, I'd have found him innocent as well. Although I know he's dirty.
Why?
Because of the evidence that I was aware of. Fact, at the end of the documentary, his agent, who was his confidant, his friend who went through everything, visited him, gave him money, went to visit him all the time in the jail, did everything. in the documentary, he closes with, I had to ask him the last day we were together, Juice, did you do it? And his response was, had she not answered the door with a knife in her hand, she'd be around today.
Wow. Holy shit.
Now, that is a narcissistic individual. We're going to take a break. Pause for the cause. So, there is no doubt in my mind that O.J. is responsible for the deaths of those two, but it wasn't my case, so he's out. I don't care. Well, he's dead now.
What was it, LAPD?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, he wrote a book called If I Did It, and I don't even know how much more clear you could get at that point.
Never read it.
Now, is it true that once someone is proven not guilty, they can't be tried again for the same thing?
Yes.
What is up with that kind of technicality within the Justice Department?
Don't ask me. Ask the people who wrote it.
Yeah. Is Judge Tynan still alive?
Judge Tynan is still alive. Just retired recently, I understand.
Oh, wow. So he's been going this whole time.
Yeah, he was a good guy.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I mean, was there anything you felt that the Netflix documentary or the Peacock documentary didn't cover, or do you think they did a really good job?
Netflix did an excellent job, and I really don't remember about Peacock that much.
Yeah, well, Peacock was more about Richard's life.
Yes, it was about his family and his life and stuff like that. So I don't want to hurt Peacock's feelings, but I watched it, but I didn't pay that close attention to it because it was hard to compare. You can't compare Peacock to what Netflix did.
Well, it was like two different sections of Philip Carlo's book, because if you got part one where it's like the murders, and then I think it's like part 3 or 4 where it gets into the trial. But it completely skipped over Richard Ramirez, and that's where Peacock picked it up. Yeah,
Netflix was never going to be about Richard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was supposed to be a story about you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing. I mean, to think that, like I said earlier, I mean, just a young guy coming up in a department and speaking your mind and being as well adjusted as you were and using lessons you've learned in the past to apply towards this case. I mean, like I said, the whole thing just plays out like poetic justice.
Maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was,
You definitely were. You were right the whole time.
And so it's paid off in the long run. I was about 34, 35 years old then. I'm now 75, and I'm still speaking on a case all around the United States.
Yeah. Well, and you're still doing well, man. You might be 75, but you're kicking around like you're 40.
I'm still drinking wine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you are one of the funnest people I could go to dinner with. It's always a good time every time we've gone out to eat.
It's always good to be remembered by, my wife, last time I came here, my wife, even my wife makes mistakes. She said, the first time you called, I was talking, I had you on speakerphone because I could hear you better. And she's there, and we were in our bed. I mean, we're sitting there, we're watching TV, and you said, by the way, if you'd like, you're more than welcome to bring your wife with you. And my wife is in the background swinging her finger back and forth. No, I want no part of this. So she wasn't going to come. Last night, we were out to dinner. She told a story about how we were riding around in the car and I had it on speakerphone. We weren't in no car. Even she makes mistakes once in a while.
Yeah.
But we came out here, and not all of these, I've done so many podcasts and so much of this stuff. Not all of them are as much fun or as nice. And you and your female companion, Alex, my wife loved the both of you. She's doesn't speak much, but she talked about you. She talked about the food. This morning when we went to this place to eat, she took all kinds of pictures to send them to our kids, and she was just excited about the whole thing. So it's really nice. You now have an invitation to an upcoming party that I'm having.
Your 75th and a half birthday
75th
party.
and a half birthday, because the owner of the place didn't think I'd make it to 76.
Oh, Jesus.
And so, and he very openly tells my wife, don't worry, I've got his eulogy down to 3 minutes for the 5 people that will attend his funeral. Obviously, we're close friends.
Well, I am not planning on your funeral anytime soon, but just know that if I'm invited, I'll be there. But dude, you're kicking strong, man. I've interviewed a lot of people who are, up there in age, and you're still young at heart.
Well, thank you.
And it's amazing because you could really tell that you've loved your career. You've kept such a positive outlook on life. You've matched all of this darkness with humor.
I still have fun in life. I laughed. My wife just shakes her head. When we took off from Orange County, when we got in the jet, got a message from my son. He says, both of you have fun. He says, don't forget when you land, send me a message and let me know that you landed safely. And I looked at my wife and I said, geez, you remind me so much of your mother. Because what happens when we get there and we get drunk and forget to call him? Then he's going to be worried. So I just wrote him back. I said, son, if you hear from us, great. If you don't hear from us, just watch the news. See if we see if the plane crashed. Talk to you if we make it through this ordeal.
Right.
So you got to laugh at everything. There's not much that I don't laugh at.
Yeah.
And I know it pisses people off, especially my wife. I just have fun in life. And once again, I think I said it last time, there's a plug for Jamie Foxx out there. Jamie Foxx says, without humor, without laughter, we've got nothing. And that's the way I believe. My friend Ray Verdugo, who didn't believe in me, he was a homicide investigator that I wanted to work with, let him polish me up. He sits there and says, we all have in order to do this job, you have to have a moral sense of humor. But if you don't have that sense of humor, you'll never get out alive. And so many people retire out of Sheriff's Homicide Bureau with blood pressure problems. They've all got high blood pressure. I never understood it, but so many people retired, and then you see them 6 months later and they look great. It's like they've been rejuvenated. Well, you just take away all the stress that goes with the job and the stuff that your body fights off, the ugliness of life, and you got to keep going. So when you're not put in that position where you have to keep going anymore, it makes life much easier. Everything else, a piece of cake.
Yeah. Well, my man, you absolutely crushed it. I mean, you've made definitely a legacy for yourself. You've made a legacy for your children. And I know for a fact that your dad is looking down on all of this, and he's proud for sure, man.
That's important. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, everybody should thank Gil Carrillo for being here. I'm sure you've talked about this ad nauseum. And I'm sure it gets annoying, but the fact that you
ad nauseum, that's another big word. That's a new one I haven't heard.
Yeah. Rich white people lingo. Yeah. But no, the fact that you came out to Vegas and the fact that you were willing to share your story again is so deeply appreciated by me, and I guarantee you everybody at home as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Gil recently just got on social media. He's got a couple thousand friends on Facebook now. I wouldn't recommend his Facebook, though. Follow him on Instagram at Real Gil Carrillo.
At Real Gil Carrillo, they because of this Netflix thing and the stuff I was doing at George, they encouraged me to do this. I answer every one of my Instagrams. The only ones I don't, every once, I'd say right now I got pretty close to 11,000 followers on Instagram, and I answer every one. With the exception, if you're going to put shit on there like, you should be dead, Richard should still be alive,
Oh, Jesus.
And the guy somebody just wrote me one yesterday, you're so full of shit, you probably used somebody else, you lied. And so those, out of the 11,000, I'd say I probably received anywhere from 50 to 100 max that are negative. Everything else is so positive, and it sometimes it puts a lump in my throat from people all around the world.
Right.
So I'm just a very fortunate man that I was surrounded by a good family, good friends, and professional partners that I work with.
Right. Well, you're a hero, my friend. People play you in movies, and that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And everybody at home, like I said, at Real Gil Carrillo. And yeah, man, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And we'll be at your 75th and a half birthday party.
All right.
All right, everybody. Peace.